Okay, shalom. This is Gene Keener with SYMF Yeshua Messianic Fellowship. Today is Wednesday, July 1, 2020, and we are going to be in Galatians chapter 2. This is our fourth session of Galatians chapter 2. We tried to start last week, and it just didn't come together. So sorry about that. Things kind of fell apart. So we're going to restart, retry Galatians 2D again tonight, and God willing, things will get moving. I have one other thing to get set up here. So excuse me while I focus on something else for a second. Okay, now we need to reset frame size on this window. See how well that works. Okay, now let's get out the reading and the study. Back to the reading. Okay, we're about ready. It's 6 o'clock right now. If you can, just type in a chat message, let me know about how long the delay is from the time I'm speaking to the time you hear it. For some strange reason, the chat is instantaneous, but my voice is anywhere from 30 seconds to 3 minutes or so delayed. I still haven't figured out how to make that work. But one of the other things we did to try to make things smoother with the connection and not such a big delay was to take out the camera shot on my face. You really didn't need to look at me anyways, and just wanted to slim down the upload so that hopefully it goes a little better doing it this way. So let me know. It's my computer says 6:01, and so if you get a chance, just type a message in the chat that to let me know approximately how long that delay is. Okay, that's basically it. I'm going to be tabbing between some screens because this one actually says we have 2 people on, so go over to the chat and type in a hello or a shalom or good to see you, and something like that, so that we can get an idea who's here. Okay, so oh, forgot one thing. Okay, that went out. This starting off was always kind of funny because the old radio thing, you never leave a mic dead for 5 seconds, and so I'm talking, but I really don't have anything to say yet. You ever heard someone trying to talk and say something and never getting anything out of their mind that's actually intelligent or useful? That's kind of the stage I'm at right now, waiting for people to come in and settle down and grab a hunk of dinner or something, and we'll see. So that's where I'm at right now. Okay, so do please say hello in the chat. Let me say the the magic words on YouTube. Be sure to like, subscribe, and click the bell for the notifications so that you're notified when the live chat comes on. I think that's it. Oh, one other thing. Since it's not Shabbat, I can say this. If you want to donate anything to help with the operations of the congregation or of this channel, you can find us on the internet. Our web address is simchatyeshua.org. That's SIMCHATYESHUA.org. There's another congregation not all too far from here that also uses the name Simchat Yeshua, but they're .com. So if you're looking for .com, we're not it. .org is us. Okay. So you can find out you can contribute through PayPal, and you can always mail in a check to the congregation PO box, which is also on the website. So you can follow up there. Shalom, Ruchama. Good to see you. How are things? How's things at the work? Of course, the hard part is having responded to Barbara. I have to wait till she actually hears this and then responds. Actually, I maybe can type a chat response first, and she'll get it soon, quicker. I think. Excuse me while I misspell and back up and misspell and back up. Okay, maybe she'll get that sooner. Okay, it's currently 6:05. Want to wait a couple more minutes to see who is going to come on. And that's the one. Okay. I'm yeah, they're saying that there's a lot of new cases popping up. I'm not sure if they're really new cases, and what they're giving a lot of numbers, but I'm not sure if these are people who are tested positive but aren't having any symptoms. And I don't know why they'd be in that ward if they're not positive. That seems kind of dangerous. But I'm waiting to see when there's usually a big sensational splash about certain numbers, and then you have to wait for a while before the talking heads go back and forth a few times, and then the numbers get readjusted to something a lot less scary. So we'll have to see how that all plays out. If they're testing more, then they're going to find more. That's an obvious, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's more danger out there. If these people are testing positive, they've been positive. We don't know exactly how long they've been positive, but how that goes. And what they're not saying on the news is how many of those are active with the virus. So I'm waiting for that part of the news to come out. Because if half the people in that ward are positive and the other half are not, it kind of makes you wonder. If the counting is half. Yeah, the other half are called rule out, quote unquote. Waiting for results. So tests are in, but nothing found out yet. Okay. Yeah, if they all come out, positive and active, then that's an issue. That's a surge. But if they're finding a lot of people that are positive but had no symptoms, have symptoms that look like the flu but aren't the COVID thing, then we need to readjust our numbers, because they're piling on a lot of numbers that don't really belong with those people who have it and are actually symptomatic and sick from it and in danger from it. So that takes a little time for the news to go through a couple cycles before people follow up and do the actual research necessary to provide a proper discussion. Okay. It's 9 after. Let me go about. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Okay. We have our text. We're starting today on verse 14 or 15. But I'm going to take a running start from verse 11 in Galatians chapter 2. And we're going to start in verse 11. I want to start at verse 11 because this is sort of the beginning of the idea that we're going to be talking about. So basically, Shaul, Paul, is justifying his position as an apostle. And he starts off by saying it was Yeshua himself that called him and sent him on a task. That fulfills. Oh, thank you, Barbara. Yeah, no new deaths. That's the important thing. There's a handle on it. So you have a lot more cases, but no one's dying from it. Then it's handled. Okay. Anyways, that's my 2 cents. Anyway, Shaul is explaining to the Galatian congregation that he has the authority to say what he has to say. And we know from earlier on in the chapter where Paul eventually went to Jerusalem and discussed his approach to the good news for the Gentiles. And the ultimate result was he received the right hand of fellowship from the leadership, from James and Peter and John, to continue to continue doing what he's doing. So he has the authority from Jerusalem to teach the Galatians what he has been teaching, and he has the authority to take the position that he's taking. Okay, that's the sort of a historical run-up to our point here. And because this is such an important issue, and because Galatians has been so badly mistaught, I'm going to be pounding on this frequently and constantly. So I'm sorry if I sound boring or I keep repeating the same thing over and over again, but it's a necessary thing because it's been so mistaught. And the bottom line is the basic argument that Paul is giving to the Galatians, and these are the Gentiles in the Galatian congregations in the region of Galatia, is that you don't have to become a Pharisee to belong to the family of God. God accepts you as you are, as a Gentile. Okay? So the conversion that these people who falsely arrived to say you have to be converted in order to be saved or to be part of the family of God are in the wrong. And that's what Paul's teaching about this. Now, know a little background in history. When a Gentile made a conversion to Judaism of that day, and even to this day, the last things that you do is that you have a baptism, mikveh in Hebrew, a tevilah, if you want, the service itself is called tevilah. Same root, but different application. And basically that's an immersion. And there's a ceremony that you go through, and basically you go down a Gentile and you come up a new creation as a Jew, and that's your conversion. And shortly after that, within 8 days, if you're a male, anyways, within 8 days of that baptism, you are to have a circumcision. Why? Because you are a new life. And so according to tradition, Torah says that anybody who is newborn needs to be, any male that is newborn needs to be circumcised on the 8th day. Um, Jewish tradition says anywhere within those 8 days is fine. But the bottom line is it's a traditional argument. It's not scriptural. Um, and as far as having to do this within 8 days of having a baptism following the conversion classes and being accepted, there's a process there that is not mentioned in the Bible, and that Paul is arguing to the Gentiles, you don't need this. The negative side of the premise is once you have done this conversion and you have made the promise that you are going to keep the commandments of the people who teach you, then you're obligated to that because you made that promise and you must keep your word. And this is the argument that Paul is saying all along, that when he's talking about the law, and he uses it about 4 different ways throughout all his writings, but in Galatians he uses it in 2 specific ways. One is the law, meaning God's own commandments, the Torah as we understand it. And then you have the law being used as referring to the man-made rules and stuff, the Pharisaic rules. And I try to use the word rule rather than laws to avoid any confusion. God's commandments are law. The man-made rules are rules. Okay, and it's a societal thing, it's a cultural thing, but it's not necessary for the Gentile to have a full place in God's kingdom. You don't have to make that conversion, and that's the argument of Galatians. So that's the run up to it. Now, verse 11, we get into an incident where, and this is again in furthering Paul's argument that he is an apostle, he is directed by God, and he was sent out by the people of Antioch to go and preach the good news to the Gentiles. So yes, he's an apostle, apparently an apostle of Messiah, by Messiah. And if there's any question, he's also an apostle from the congregation in Antioch. And yes, it's the same word. Shaliach in Hebrew and apostolos in Greek. There's no differentiation between the original 12 and anybody else. It's all the same word and all the same application. So we covered that in a little more detail, but I just wanted to bring that out there because some people really get hinky about, there's only 12 apostles and Paul was committing a great sin by presenting himself as one. And frankly, the language is the language, and it uses the same word for everyday people sent out to do things. Are apostles just as much as the original 12 are apostles. It's the same word. So, short story long. Let's get back to our thing. Okay, verse 11. Further, when Kepha came to Antioch, I opposed him publicly because he was clearly in the wrong. For prior to the arrival of certain people from the community headed by Yaakov, he had been eating with the Gentile believers. But when they came, he withdrew and separated himself because he was afraid of the faction who favored the circumcising Gentile believers. And the other Jewish believers became hypocrites along with him, so that even Barnabas was led astray by their hypocrisy. But when I saw that they were not walking a straight path, keeping in line with the truth of the good news, I said to Kepha, right in front of everyone, if you who are a Jew live like a goy and not like a Jew, why are you forcing the goyim to live like Jews? Okay. And now we get into our text for today. This is a continuation of the argument. We are Jews by birth, not so-called Goysha sinners, Gentile sinners. Even so, we have come to realize that a person is not declared righteous by God on the ground of his legalistic observance of Torah commandments, but through the Messiah Yeshua's trusting faithfulness. Therefore, we too have put our trust in Messiah Yeshua and become faithful to him, in order that we might be declared righteous on the ground of the Messiah's trusting faithfulness, and not on the ground of our legalistic observance of Torah commandments. That's a mouthful. For on the ground of legalistic observance of Torah commandments, no one will be declared righteous. Okay. Um, that's going to be our text for the day. It's a short number of verses, but there's a lot of stuff in here. Okay. Let's get this up here, that there. Okay. Okay, so verse 14, taking a running start into our section. If you, being a Jew, live in the manner of Gentiles and not as Jews, why do you compel Gentiles to live as Jews? Okay, here's the argument. Okay, if Peter was okay hanging out with Gentiles before other people from Jerusalem came up, who were obviously Pharisees, even though they were believers in Yeshua, and then he disassociates with Gentiles, and from the terminology, you get the impression. Excuse me. You get the impression Paul is accusing Peter then of flipping, and now demanding that Gentiles get the Pharisaic, become Pharisees, and get the circumcision that goes with the completion of that conversion. So beforehand, you were living, you know, it's a little hyperbole, living in the manner of Gentiles. Not that Peter was ever not kosher. Remember Acts chapter 10, the vision, when Peter was saying, to the vision, "Not so, Lord. Nothing unclean has ever touched my lips." This is 8 years after the time of Yeshua. Now, our circumstance here is 14 years afterwards, and there's no indication from Peter that he ever changed his mind that the vision with the sheets had anything to do with food, but had everything to do with accepting Gentiles as Gentiles into the community of Messiah. Okay. Verse 15, Paul goes on to a little bit of a side trip, explaining why he's making the accusation against Peter that is doing. We who are Jews by nature and not sinners of the Gentiles, ... He goes on from there. Greek, we by nature Jews and not of the nations, sinners. Okay. Now remember, he's arguing with Peter. He's not arguing to the Galatians right here. He's arguing with Peter. So he's talking to Peter. His language is rougher and harsher and more direct because Peter should have known better. Okay, and so my explanation here: we, by the fact we grew up in Torah and not pagans who do not know God. Okay, that's my version of it. The next verse finishes the idea. We know better that Pharisaism cannot save us. Okay, I want to throw that in because in all the technical detail of going through the language and trying to translate things, I don't want to miss the point here. We should know better that Pharisaism isn't the answer to a holy lifestyle. It's a way you can choose, but it's not needed. It's not necessary, and especially if you're a Gentile, because there's a big learning curve to be a Pharisee. And it's the same thing in modern Orthodox Judaism. It's the same thing. There's a big learning curve, and there's a lot of anti-Gentilism in modern Orthodox as well as Pharisaism back then. Okay, we by nature, that is physis in Greek, nature, the nature of things, the force laws, order of nature, or sinners, hamartolos, devoted to sin, a sinner, and then Gentiles, ethnos, a multitude, whether of men or of beasts, associated or living together. Okay, so we're used to the idea of the word ethnic meaning a race or a people. Okay, that's okay. So we're not. So Paul is saying, we grew up in this stuff. We grew up in Torah. We grew up learning to walk in God's ways. So it's our nature to obey God. And this is in contrast to people who did not grow up in Torah, that is, Gentiles, who are sinning not because they are hating God, but they just didn't know God's ways. Okay? And That's the part really want to consider. It's not that Paul is hating Gentiles. I mean, he spent all his time trying to reach Gentiles. Well, not all his time, but most of his time trying to reach Gentiles. Um, but rather, he's contrasting Peter being the righteous, froom, observant, um, yeshiva bucher, somebody, the guy who reads the book and knows how to live it. Um, why did you turn away from walking in the strictness of Pharisaism, only to turn back to being strict and demanding that of the Gentiles when other Pharisees show up in Antioch? It's a big hypocrisy. Okay. Okay. Um, Dr. Stern's commentary on his own translation, Goisha sinners. Goisha is just Yiddish for goy, meaning nations, of the nations. It means, common translation is Gentile. Um, you know, and so literally sinners from Gentiles. According to them, the Pharisees, Gentiles were by definition sinners since they did not have the Torah. This is why Acts 10 is Acts 10. Okay, God had to shake up Peter's presumption that the Gentiles were only sinners, so he can get to Cornelius's house and preach the good news. Okay. This equating of Torah and sinners can be found in the Apocrypha, 1 Maccabees 134, Tobit 13:6, and in the Gospels themselves, comparing Luke 18:31 to 33, and also Luke 24:7, which I quoted down below. We'll look at that in a second. Formerly, Kepha himself had held a low view of Gentiles, but his vision in Yaffo changed his attitude. Acts 10, that's a long citation if you want to read it, starting at verse 1 and 10, going all the way to 19 in chapter 11. We don't have evidence for how Shaul thought about Gentiles before he came to faith, but it is clear from the whole book of Romans and that as a Messianic Jew, he went out of his way to emphasize the equality of Jews and Gentiles before God. See also above when we get to verses 17, 18. Okay, our citations there, Luke 18, 31 to 33. Then taking the 12, Yeshua said to them, "We are now going up to Jerusalem, where everything written through the prophets about the Son of Man will come true. For he will be handed over to the Goyim and be ridiculed, insulted, and spat upon. Then after they have beaten him, they will kill him, but on the third day he will rise." Now, the terminology here, again, we don't know for sure that the translation actually used the word Goyim. That's over the Gentiles, I think is the older English translation, handed over to the Gentiles. And it's basically an identification, people who are not part of Israel, people who are not walking in God's commandments, which, by the way, was prophesied, so we're good. Then Luke 24:7, the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be executed on a stake as a criminal, but on the third day he be raised again. So again, the statement that Yeshua will be delivered into sinful hands, in this case, sinful and Gentile can be synonymous in these discussions. Now, does this mean all Gentiles are sinful? No. Does it mean that every single person in the world personally handed over Yeshua to the Romans and the Romans executed him? No. What we did caused it to happen, but we are not the ones who actually did the physical handing over. So understand this was stated in a manner that the Jewish readers of the prophets at that time would have understood. And that would have been the attitude. So Yeshua just used the identification that they would have recognized. Okay. And then even if, another commentary, even if the Pharisaic oral law permitted such commonplace rejections of the Gentiles, the written Torah forbade it. Remember, God called for us um, to not differentiate. If anybody from any of the nations wants to come and be part of the nation and to worship God and to walk in God's ways, he's to be allowed, and to with the caveat that they pick up God's commandments, they learn to live God's commandments, and they will have the status of being treated as if they were native born to Israel. And so all the anti-Gentile sentiments that are out there, even among certain messianic groups, is not by Torah, is not by God's ways. Okay, verse 16. Knowing that a man is not justified by the works of the law, but by faith in Jesus Christ, even we have believed in Christ Jesus, that we might be justified by faith in Christ, and not by the works of the law. For by the works of the law no flesh shall be justified. Notice there's 3 times this phrase, the works of the law, shows up here. That's kind of code, and we'll get into that. We'll break that down. Okay, no one will be justified. Okay, dekayu. Okay, my Greek is horrible, so I'm going to massacre it pretty much every chance I get. To render righteous, or such he ought to be. Okay, so the justification we have is to be rendered righteous, or declared righteous, I think, as Dr. Stern's translation here. This is a large citation from Dr. Stern. Declared righteous by God. Greek dikaiou, notice it's slightly spelled different, but it's all Greek to me. To make righteous or justify. In order for a person to have fellowship with God, he must be righteous, because God is righteous, holy, without sin, and cannot tolerate sin in his presence. Theology distinguishes 2 kinds of righteousness, and this is Dr. Stern's explanation. Behavioral righteousness, actually doing what is right, and forensic righteousness, he puts it in quotations so you know it's his invented term. Being regarded as righteous in the senses that God has cleared him of guilt for past sins, and that God has given him a new human nature inclined to obey God rather than rebel against him as before. Okay. There are other ways of explaining that. I thought forensic righteousness was kind of cute, being found righteous, kind of like an investigation of well, it's not a crime scene, but being putting together the details to show that we are declared righteous. Uses the phrase forensic. That's okay. Okay. Yeshua the Messiah has made forensic righteousness available to everyone by paying on everyone's behalf the penalty for sins, which God's justice demands. Death, looking at Romans 5:12 to 21. Forensic righteousness is appropriated by an individual for himself the moment he unreservedly puts his trust in God, which at this point in history entails also trusting in Yeshua the Messiah upon learning of him and understanding what he has done. First Yochanan Aleph, or 1 John 2:23. The task of becoming behaviorally righteous begins with appropriating forensic righteousness by trusting in Yeshua, and it occupies the rest of a believer's life, being completed only at his own death when he goes to be with Yeshua. Philippians 1:23. Okay. Libraries of books have been written. I guess it requires a little explanation here. Okay. So the point that Dr. Stern's making, and I agree with him on this, is we are declared righteous by appropriating that which Yeshua has done for us. Okay. It's very difficult to pick it out of Isaiah 53:10, but the language is in there. It's just hard to figure out because there's a lot of pronouns in the Hebrew, and you have to go through really carefully and figure out to whom which particular pronoun applies. But basically, this is my translation, my interpretation, my application of Isaiah 53:10. Is that if you look upon the sacrifice of Yeshua and you tell God that you want that sacrifice to count for you for your forgiveness, God will make it count for you. Okay? And that's how you appropriate that forensic righteousness that Dr. Stern identifies. Okay, now that you are declared righteous, now that you are cleansed by the declaration of God, how do you live your life now that you are saved? And this is where a big argument occurs in modern Christianity. Modern Christianity takes the approach that you're saved. Anything you do from this point forward is just free. You know, God loves you so much, He will never count against you any sin that you do from this point forward. That's not the case. We have lots of references and lots of discussions as I'm not sure if we're going into it now, but as we go, and we're going to realize that God's calling on us is now that we are saved. It's expected for us to learn by God's commandments. That's God's expectations of us. Okay, but the thing is, are you perfect at this day one? No. Especially if you are coming into a messianic point of view, brand new. A lot of this is quite new, quite challenging, quite fearful, quite over your head. And it's going to take a time for you to learn enough to where you can get up to speed and start working on doing things the right way. And eventually you pick it up, and eventually you get good at it, and eventually you do it comfortably, and you're happy, and you realize this is exactly how God wants you to live. At first, though, it might be difficult, and so just understand it's a process. And Paul, I'm sorry, in Acts chapter 15, that was the decision. What do you do with these Gentiles? Let's not put anything on them except clean up your act enough to where you can get into a synagogue. And then every Sabbath, Moses is being taught, so go and learn a holy lifestyle in the synagogue every Sabbath day. Okay, let's go on. Libraries of books have been written on the subject of righteousness, both Jewish ethical treatises and volumes of Christian theology. Since the question of how righteousness is attained sparked the entire Protestant Reformation. What is important to keep in mind here is the difference between these two kinds of righteousness. Each time the Greek word dikaio, or a cognate is encountered, it must be decided which of these two meanings of the word is meant. In the present tense and the next, all four instances of dikaio, I'll get this right maybe by the end of this session, refer to forensic righteousness. But in verse 21, the related word dikaiosune refers to behavioral righteousness. That's a big long citation by Dr. Stern. Okay, works of the law, Greek ergo nomo, meaning business, employment, that which anyone is occupied, anything established, anything received by usage, a custom, a law, a command. It is crucial to properly define law in this context, as not all law is Torah. Okay? Not all law is Torah. Actually, that's my commentary. Let me cite myself here. Okay. Okay, the word nomos means law. Generally speaks of the Torah. The Septuagint translates Torah as nomos, to give you an idea of the connection. However, it's not purely and only Torah, as in the instruction. Remember, Torah means instruction. It doesn't mean law. There are a lot of laws in God's instruction, but Torah does not clinically mean law. However, amongst the other things that the Septuagint deliberately translated the way it was, Torah in Hebrew was translated as nomos in Greek in the Septuagint, and that translation has stuck ever since. So while it's really not clinically accurate, because Torah is a different understanding than law, nonetheless, this is thrust upon us, and so people will translate nomos and say it's law. So Torah must also means law. Now, are there laws in Torah? Yes, and sometimes we refer to Torah as law because there are laws within Torah. But the more clinical interpretation of Torah would be instructions. Okay, so Torah, or as nomos, sometimes refers to a man-made rules. Sometimes refers to consequential principles, such as Romans 7:21 and 23, and also out of Romans 7 to 13. The commandment that is the law was meant to bring life, but sin deceived. The law is holy, just, and good. It brings life, not death. It is breaking the law, that is sin, that brings death. Okay, this is another commentary, comment or connecting this. Okay, the point being here that understanding the usage of the word law. It's used in both cases as man-made rules and also God's commandments. And so you have to decipher which is it. Okay, here you kind of have it both ways in the same sentence. You know, the commandment, that is the law, is meant to bring life, but sin deceived. The law is holy, just, and good, and brings life and not death. It is breaking the law that brings death. Okay, so you have this use of commandment or law in the same phrase where commandment, the law, is meant to bring life. Okay, so without an explanation or warning, Shaul uses law at least 4 different ways. And I think I mentioned this already. Torah or Bible, Romans 7:12. Traditions, Colossians 2:20 and 21. Sin and death, Romans 7:25. And urgings of the flesh, Romans 7:23. The first 2 are used here in Galatians. The second 2 don't show up in this letter. So some people say there's 6 different ways. I haven't really reviewed that and confirmed it, but it's okay. Continuation on of a commentary. What has traditionally been interpreted as Paul's diatribe against works is in fact merely a warning, however strict it may be, that Torah observance alone, without proper intention, is insufficient to gain interest into God's kingdom. I would take an issue with that. Just because without proper intention, I'm not sure is fully explained well enough. Yes, Ruhama, I can bring copies of this to the park for Shabbat. Okay. Actually, if I was smart, I probably would have been doing that all along, but, you know, I'm not that good at it. Yeah, and I need to sit down and rework the bulletin once again because we're not meeting online on Shabbat any longer. We're meeting at the park, so I need to change the bulletin, but I still want to hand out stuff for people to see what's going on. Okay, so, and then another commentator, when properly connected to the context of Galatians, works of the law, Maaseh HaTorah, that's Hebrew, can be understood as a false system of justification, which was a Pharisaic system of decrees and traditions specifically built as a fence for the written commandments. That's the stated reason for it. Secondary reason of its explosion in the number and severity of the commandments or rules of Pharisaism and modern Orthodox is to build a fence between Jews and Gentiles. Okay, that's another reason why we should not be beholding to Pharisaic or modern Orthodox tradition. It can't, you know, these things can be useful and helpful, but they should not properly own us. Okay, continuing on. Another commentator, it will be well to bear in mind the fact, which so far as we know had not received attention before it was noted in Cranfield's article in the Scottish Journal of Theology, long sidestep, that the Greek language of Paul's day possessed no word group corresponding to our legalism, legalist or legalistic. This means that he lacked a convenient terminology for expressing a vital distinction, so that was and so was surely seriously hampered in the work of clarifying the Christian position in regard to the law. In view of this, we should always, we think, be ready to reckon with the possibility that Pauline's statements, which at first sight seem to disparage the law, were really directed not against the law itself, but against the misunderstandings and the misuse of it for which we now have a convenient terminology. In this very difficult terrain, Paul was pioneering. If we make due allowance for these circumstances, we shall not be so easily baffled or misled by a certain impreciseness of statement, which we shall sometimes encounter. Okay, and this I believe is a really, really good understanding. Okay, um, if there is no language for legalism, and so how well do we use it then, even in modern times, to use the word legalism when we're talking about Paul's letters? Okay, um, Paul was never telling us to be not Torah observant, but he was telling us to not embrace Pharisaism, and by modern extension, Orthodox Judaism, not to embrace that as the means of our righteousness, the means of attaining and maintaining our righteousness. Okay. And that's the argument in Galatians. So we need to be careful, and I keep harping on this. I'm sorry for being such a broken record. But we need to keep harping on this because this is the argument we need to make. I want you guys to win the arguments. I want you to have and possess the capability of carrying this fight to people who don't understand. And so we need to fight the good fight. We need to make the arguments, okay? And so be prepared to have this information. Be prepared to advise and remind people that the use of the word law, nomos in Greek, had two different uses, opposite uses in Paul's letters, and he uses both meanings interchangeably without explaining to you. Context drives everything. Context, context, context. Start with an understanding. Did Paul ever tell people to disobey God? Yes or no? Did Paul tell people to disobey God? Therefore, any interpretation of Paul's use of the word law in saying that it is bad can't mean God's commandments. Okay? You need to win your arguments, and that's one of the ways to do it, is start people thinking with how can you say Paul's arguing against God's commandments at the same time he's arguing for it. Okay, the law is good, just, and righteous. Okay, verse 17. But if, while we seek to be justified by Christ, we ourselves are also found sinners, is Christ therefore a minister of sin? Certainly not. Okay, also found sinners. If we, having known God's commands, forsake Torah and live like Torah does not exist, does Messiah bring us to this conclusion? That's my question. Okay. If we forsake Torah and live like Torah does not exist, God's commandments don't exist, does Messiah bring us to understanding this? The obvious answer is no. Okay. Commentary. Is the office of my word processor just took a pause. It does this every once in a while. I've had this it's not a new computer any longer, but I've had this computer for a while. And it does this once in a while. It just freezes up, goes into a save. It's on autosave, and so it goes into a save mode. But sometimes it hangs up in there, and it takes a while to save. It doesn't do it totally in the background like it's supposed to. Okay. So, commentary. Is the office of HaMashiach one that causes all men to come up short according to the requirements of the Torah? No, not at all. Great comment. Okay. Does God give us commandments that we can't possibly keep in order to keep us down? No. God gives us commandments that he wants us to do, Moses tells us it was doable. Okay, Deuteronomy 30, it's doable. We can do this. What are we lacking? The desire. We're lacking the desire. And once you gain the desire, the methodology of how to walk in God's commandments becomes possible. But it's not impossible. We just simply possess the lack. We just decline the desire to live right by God. So, um, the okay. Does Christ therefore become a minister of sin, a provider of sin, because we don't keep the commandments? Okay, diakonos, one who executes the commands of another, especially of a master, a servant, that is a servant, an attendant, or a minister. Okay, so if while we seek to be justified by Christ, we ourselves are also found sinners, is Christ therefore a purveyor of sin, one who provides sin or causes sin or promotes sin? You get the nuances on this word, okay? And if that's the case, is this the command of the Father that he do so? Obviously not. So Messiah cannot be bringing us to the conclusion that living like Torah does not exist is proper. Therefore, the argument that Yeshua tells us to not keep the Torah is not proper, and that the rules, the Pharisaic rules that Paul is arguing against, is a different matter than God's commandments. Okay. From Paul's perspective, the logic was solid. Why would Yehovah seem to provide a way of being declared clear, pure, sincere, right, true, and just by accepting the message of Yeshua, only to later announce that we are all coming up deficient in the eyes of Yehovah? This would make Yeshua an officiator, shamash, a servant, of sin and error. Rather, as I previously said, if we come, this is a commentary, obviously, if we come up short in the eyes of Yehovah, it is only because we are guilty of adding something to the Torah or taking away something from the Torah. This was precisely Paul's argument. Okay, and again, this all goes back to the major point of the letter is you don't need to be a Pharisee. In fact, he goes on to argue that you shouldn't become a Pharisee, or in modern terminology, you should not become Orthodox, because that conversion process will tear you away from what Messiah has done for us. When you make that conversion, you set yourself up to make your own salvation. We'll get into that more as we go. Okay, response from Paul answering his own questions. Certainly not. Genomai, I think I said that right. Me genomai. May it never be. Often translated as God forbid, for increased emphasis. Okay, so may it never be that we say something silly that Messiah causes us to be a sinner by taking us away from Torah. Never, ever. Okay, that's it. We have our citations here at the bottom of the page, and okay, I thought I had a graphic on here, but I guess that was before. Never mind. That's it for our study. Any questions, comments, rebukes? And let me double check and see. Oops, wrong one. Okay, I'll get this right yet. All right. Okay. Questions, comments, rebukes. I'll hang on for a few minutes because I don't know how long the delay is, so I don't want to cut things off short. I get complaints from some people that if I cut off short before you hear what I say, that gets lost. So I'm going to hang out here for a few minutes. Questions, comments, rebukes, please please type in. You got any questions? Got any issues? Um, any comments? Um, Again, let me remind you this is a YouTube live chat, so you can come back on. You can get onto the page or the page here. You can like, you can subscribe, you can tell others about it. You can also ring that bell to be notified when this session comes live. We are here every Wednesday at 6 o'clock California time. We were asked to start a little bit earlier because people back east, for some reason, want to sleep at night. I have no idea why they want to do that. Okay, thank you, Barbara. 1 minute delay. Um, Actually, it's better without the video then, without the video of my face. Okay, so um, that's why we start at 6 rather than any bit later. And so that's for anybody who is back east and wants to catch us before it's all entirely too late. Okay. Um, any questions, comments? I'll even take a rebuke. Alo Devar, Ruhama, and okay. I will quiet down at this point and leave this run for about a minute. If you have anything else to add into the chat, go ahead and put it in. I'll respond to it before we close down, but otherwise I'll just quiet down at this point and wait for about a minute or so to pass so I can shut off and keep everything on the recording. Thank you very much. Shalom. God bless you. Have a good week. God willing, we'll see you on Shabbat. If not, go find yourself a synagogue, a Messianic synagogue preferably, to go and learn the ways of holiness so you can please God with how you live your life. Okay. Shalom. God bless you.
Did it work?